box below. Unlike most of the African diaspora in the so-called New World, the history of Afro-Puerto Ricans does not begin with slavery, but with the arrival of African men called libertos, who served alongside Spanish conquistadors in taking over the island of Puerto Rico. One of the descendants of these first free African men was Francis Gallego, who was known as the first entrepreneur of African descent in Puerto Rico. The libertos were Christianized and spoke Spanish fluently. The libertos had the freedom to move about and seek economic opportunities on the island of Puerto Rico. By 1820, there were about 104 free libertos in San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico today. Though they outnumbered the Spaniards, opportunities for them to gain equal rights were limited. During this time, they primarily lived in restricted areas and were not able to choose freely their occupations or have access to social institutions. Even though they were able to use their legal position to acquire some wealth, they still experienced racial discrimination. The primary reason African slaves were brought into Puerto Rico was because the original Taino population was being decimated as a labor force. Friar Bartolome de las Casas, who had accompanied Ponce de Leon to the new island of Puerto Rico, was outraged at the Spanish treatment of the Taino Indians, and in 1512, he protested to the Spanish court. He fought for the freedom of the natives and was able to secure their rights, but the Spanish colonists, fearing the loss of their labor force, also protested before the courts. They complained that they needed manpower to work in the mines, build forts, and so on. Ironically, as an alternative, Las Casas suggested the importation and use of African slaves. Thus, in 1517, the Spanish crown permitted its subjects to import enslaved African people. These early enslaved Africans were brought originally to work on the gold mines, even though they also worked on sugarcane plantations. They became artisans, domestic laborers, ship merchants, and dock workers. Just a short time after their arrival, in 1527, the first major slave rebellion occurred in Puerto Rico, as dozens of Afro-Puerto Ricans fought against the colonists in a brief revolt. A few Afro-Puerto Ricans retreated to the mountains, where they resided as Maroons with surviving Tainos. During the following centuries, by 1873, Afro-Puerto Ricans had carried out more than 20 revolts. Some were of great political importance, such as the Ponce and Vega Baja conspiracies. Even though the original Afro-Puerto Rican was a free man, coming to the island as a soldier, the overwhelming majority of the ancestors of Afro-Puerto Ricans today are descended from enslaved Africans. According to one historian, the exact origin of Afro-Puerto Ricans can be said to be primarily the Gold Coast of Ghana, Nigeria, and the African state of Dahomey, many of which coming from the Yoruba and Igbo ethnic group. As in other Spanish colonies, the early conquistadors and their African companions were not accompanied by females. Thus, intermarriage was rampant among the Spaniard, Africans, and Tainos. The same as other parts of Spanish America, the enslaved Africans were given the last names of their Spanish owner and later passed it on to their descendants. Enslaved Africans were abused in Puerto Rico as they were throughout the transatlantic slave trade route. They were branded like cattle with hot irons called carimbo, while forced to convert to Catholicism. Even though the enslaved lacked sufficient food and were subject to extreme physical abuses among the Middle Passage, Afro-Puerto Ricans, like all Afro-descended people, are the products of survival. Puerto Rico experienced slavery for about 365 years. The number of enslaved people from 1776 to 1818 grew from about 6,500 to 31,000. However, the greatest importation of enslaved people did not occur until the 19th century, when the sugar industry became the island's most important economic resource. Even though in 1835, Queen Maria Cristina of Spain had abolished the slave trade, illegal trading continued to persist. Afro-Puerto Ricans have significantly influenced the culture of Puerto Rico. Without the Afro-Puerto Rican populace, Puerto Rico would not be known for what it is today. Even though the modern-day city of Ponce has had an influx of many European immigrants, Afro-Puerto Ricans were still able to maintain the strong African cultural presence through religion, music, and even food. One of the most popular music forms in Puerto Rico is bamba and plena. Both share African origins and began primarily in Loiza and Ponce. Bamba is considered more pure African, coming from the Ashanti tribes and the older of the two. Bamba began in the 17th century. It was brought to Ponce by enslaved Africans who worked on the sugar plantations. The dialogue between the dancer and drummer was used as a diversion by the African slaves from the harsh treatment that was inflicted upon them. They would perform in song as well as dance during special religious holidays and social events. Not only did enslaved Africans use bamba for celebrations, but also as a tool to conspire towards their freedom from bondage. The drums would relay various messages. The dialogue would convey a series of signals that were used to translate messages without the slave owner's awareness. Plena's root can also be traced back to Africa, but it was transformed into a Puerto Rican art form by the fusion of English-speaking blacks who came to Puerto Rico from the British Caribbean islands seeking work in the late 19th century. Most became sugarcane field workers, from which came the fusion of Afro-Caribbean, Tayanos, and Spanish sounds that make up Plena. As the rural workers traveled to various urban areas of Puerto Rico, such as San Juan, it became part of the Puerto Rican culture. Plena, as bamba, were performed for entertainment as well as to convey information. Plena was sung and played throughout Puerto Rico. Dancing Plena became a kind of living newspaper conveying a variety of information, ranging from religion, local and national events, to evoking protest. Singers often sang about events and ridiculed their adversaries. Presently, salsa and reggaeton are the two most popular music and dance genres of Puerto Rico. Salsa, which translates to sauce, originated from Afro-Cuban and Afro-Caribbean rhythms. However, the term salsa was created by Puerto Ricans living in New York City who abandoned their bamba and plena for the fusion of the rumba, mambo, cha-cha, guanguaco, and merengue. Salsa has become a popular genre worldwide. Reggaeton is the most recent dance music genre in Puerto Rico. It's a derivative of Jamaican reggae and hip-hop, mixed in with the Puerto Rico's bamba and salsa rhythms. Reggaeton is primarily popular among Latin youth today.
Okay, there you have it. I know. I stole the content. I know, but fuck it, because I gave it back to you motherfuckers. So, that's not important, but what's important is that you people gotta realize that it don't matter how much of this you got and how less of this you got, because none of that shit make you who you are. So don't let how much of this you got define the person you are, and it don't matter where the fuck you come from, you bunch of cabrones. What matters that you doing what the fuck you gotta do, where the fuck you at, okay? Because people, they're gonna be people, and it don't matter where the fuck you live and who the fuck you married to and all that bullshit. So live, cabrones, and let live, and get it together. Motherfucker, cabrón.